the previous discussion.
The 30% profit oil that the National Assembly has designated for the purpose of frontier exploration, which is about $375 million per annum, is not only going to be domiciled in frontiers in the north, but we have frontiers in the south, the Anambra Basin, the Dahomey Basin, the Calabar Basin, and even areas in the Niger Delta that are not yet explored.
The bill now has ensured that there is technical regulation and commercial regulation for all the sectors of the petroleum economy, so that has helped. The bill has done something that has never happened in the past, that is refer to host communities and talk about community funds and community development. That has never been done in the past. It has totally overhauled the fiscals. Our fiscals were really, really outdated, and that is very significant.
All right, now those were the two guests that we had yesterday. That's Honorable Tahir Monguno of the House of Reps, and also Professor Yinka Omorugbe. Of course, he's a professor of law and former company secretary and legal advisor to the NNPC. So this morning we also have guests with us here in the studio, and of course via Zoom. With us here in the Abuja studios, let's welcome a regular guest on Good Morning Nigeria, Mr. Oke Epia, Executive Director, Other Paper Nigeria. Mr. Oke Epia, of course, was involved in a series of advocacy programs as well as retreats organized for not just members of the House and the Senate or the National Assembly, but other stakeholders in the PIB. Okay, delighted to have you this morning.
Thank you. A pleasure to be here.
Okay. And also joining us for this conversation this morning, we also a regular guest on Good Morning Nigeria. This time, of course, is joining us via Zoom. Kirian, you have...
all right, that's Simbi Wabote. Simbi Wabote is the Executive Secretary, Nigerian Content Development and Monitoring Board. We're glad to have you on this morning. Okay, and also via Zoom is Professor Wumi Iledare, Professor of Petroleum Economics. He's also with the Oil and Gas Institute, Ghana. He's joining us this morning from the U.S. Good morning and welcome to the program.
Good morning. It's always good to be with you.
All right. Let's begin by taking advantage of the clear connection right away to Professor Wumi Iledare. Well, Professor Iledare, of course, we'll come back to you presently while we're trying to get a link to Engineer Wabote of the local content board, and we'll synchronize that so that the two Zooms are seamless. But in the meantime, let's begin with Oke Epia, Executive Director, Other Paper Nigeria. At long last, some would say the two chambers have passed the PIB. There are still some areas of disagreement, and the conference has been set up. But tell us, what are your sentiments at this time, considering the odyssey of the PIB?
Thank you. My sentiments, because of where I am from, the part of the country I am from, would resonate with the barrage of reactions from that region of the country. Respect to the percentage funding for host communities. There is a difference between what the Senate recommended and what the House of Representatives approved. The general opinion is that both the position taken by the House of Representatives is more like it, which is 5%. You know, so respect to sentiments, that's where I would align myself with. But I think that having been involved to some extent with, you know, the efforts and advocacy to see to where we are currently, I am more at home to speak more objectively with some facts and based on what I have learned in the course of the work that we have done. And I think that, yes, why that may be a touchy point, indeed the most touchy of all the provisions in the PIB that has been passed by the chambers, the percentage allocation to host communities. But there are also some other, some gains that have been recorded, in the bill. We must bear in mind that legislation is an organic process, lawmaking. We may not have a perfect PIB, but it's astounding that we have a PIB in place that is most likely going to receive presidential assent, and then we would have some decent regulation and certainty around, the industry, the petroleum industry. If we are able to get the National Assembly to harmonize around the percentage, hopefully 5% minimum, then I think that would have made great strides, and many across boards would be able to make some concessions and say, look, let's move forward in the interest of the industry, in the interest of the country, and of course, bearing in mind that we're talking about a resource that is, definitely, faced by, talk about challenges from, renewable and all of that. So it may be a good place to leave it at 5%, so that the sleeping dogs may be requested or appealed to lie down, so that we'll make progress. But I think that it's good to be objective, to speak to certain gains that have been recorded for the host communities specifically. I know most of the talk is about that percentage funding, but there are also some issues, some concessions that have been made by the bill. Remember that we made some detailed analysis of the host communities, component of the bill. Broadly speaking, around the ownership of the trust funds, around environmental issues, and of course the funding. The ownership, I think, has been substantially addressed. I see that the bill, the report as passed by both chambers, has removed that obnoxious aspect of the bill, original draft, which said that members of the Board of Trustees of the funds could be appointed from anywhere else in the country. That was a major issue around ownership, and I see that has been addressed. It's been deleted. So what we now have, from what I see, is that members of the Board of Trustees of the funds will be from the communities, in consultation, of course, with the companies, that is the settlers. So that is one key area around ownership that has been addressed. So we must be objective and say, look, yes, this is good. We still need to do more here. And maybe as we get along, I'll raise some other issues. I think that we need to commend the state actors for in getting us to where we are.
All right. We had earlier introduced Simbi Wabote, Secretary General, Executive Secretary, Nigerian Content Development and Monitoring Board. We has now been connected. So good morning and welcome to the program.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. It's always a pleasure to be here.
All right. We'll get back to you in due course. But for now, let's take on Professor Wumi Iledare, Professor of Petroleum Economics. So the PIB has finally been passed, and a committee set up by the National Assembly to address some legislative disharmonies in certain components of the bill, especially the percentage funding for the host communities. Let's get your take on what has played out, since the passage of the bill, because this is being debated across sections of Nigerians.
Again, thank you. Good morning, Nigeria, for having me. Always a pleasure. Let me begin by just commending the National Assembly for doing what ought to have been done some 12, 14 years ago. I think I commend them. Of course, I also want to say that there can be no perfect bill in the political system where mutuality of interest must be optimized. And so I commend them as well. I also must commend the interagency team that work on this bill. And I think I have the privilege of seeing the debate. Yes, I could see that two things are of great concern and that more or less generated a lot of debate. One is the host community funding, and we must commend the laudable method to try to address the host community development, even if it's not perfect. at least for the first time, there's a bill that stipulates how money should be collected and how money should be used to develop the community. And that is commendable. And I think the other aspect that is generating a lot of conversation is the 30% profit oil. Profit oil is not the same thing as NNPC profit. I think we need to understand that. Profit oil is with respect to the production sharing contract that the government is entitled to a share of the profit after all costs and royalty have been deducted. I think it is, in my opinion, something that needs to be looked at, both from the constitutional definition of federation account, and secondly, the fact that NNPC is a liability company. I think we need to go back to the Supreme Court ruling several years ago with respect to whether the federation account money could be, I'm not a lawyer, could be set aside before reaching the federation account. Now, apart from that, I think people need to know that exploration is more or less like a gamble. And if you are going to take 30% of profit oil for exploration, it doesn't matter where the basins are. One needs to do a lot of geological understanding and study of the basins. So I really think that particular 30%, even though it may look noble, has constitutional implications. Even when the state governors were very much opposed to even setting aside some money for sovereign wealth fund, which is done all over the place. I know we're going to have opportunity to do a lot of conversation, but let me say again that I do not think, even as noble as it is, that we have host community in view in this bill. I think the amount of money that is being surrendered for this development is not, in my opinion, going to solve the ownership agitation and something else. I would rather see a surrendering of a proportion of the royalty to be able to kill two bucks at the same time. Even if it's going to be 5% of royalty rather than 5% of OPEC. I've always wondered, why do we want the companies to be surrendering the money for this type of things that are more or less state responsibility? And I think we didn't take the opportunity to do what I think would have been more noble to be able to solve this agitation permanently. If 30% could be taken for exploration, I just cannot see why some percentage from government share of revenue from oil cannot be surrendered to host community, including even the 13% derivation and including even the state-owned appropriation. The host community is so relevant. Even if you look at the budget for 2022, you are looking at 1.8 million barrels per day, $57 per barrel. Those are so stochastic that I think taking care of those community will probably make that possibility more realistic. And finally, because I like to give other opportunities to others, I also think that when you are reforming an industry, it's about the future. What I see in this bill, and I want to say that it is a good bill and it must not be surrendered for a perfect bill, but it's too much looking at the current situation. Instead of writing a bill that will make the future more holistic and more realistic, I just see that the political power tends to always think that they will be in power forever, and they are more concentrated about what they want now instead of what is going to be good for the nation in the future. Having said that, I still think that a good bill must not be sacrificed on the platter of a perfect bill that does not exist. Thank you, and I will be glad to speak more on the two aspects when the time comes.
All right, thank you very much, Professor Wumi Ledare, there for your opening comments. We'll come back to you. Let's bring in now Engineer Simbi Wabote, who is the Executive Secretary of the Content Development and Management Board. Engineer Wabote, well, it's always been said that the PIB is a potential game changer in the oil and gas industry, and that the long delay in passing the bill had also impacted, as it were, on the petroleum subsector. Now that we are pretty close, as it were, to getting an act, that's to say with the harmonization of the two versions in the National Assembly and ultimately with the presidential assent, we'll have a PIA. What will this mean for local content?
Yeah, thank you very much. And then I must thank Good Morning Nigeria for the good work you are doing. Let me join my fellow panelists to commend the National Assembly for seeing this bill through to this point. Let me also commend the interagency that worked with the National Assembly to get this bill to this point. It has never been like this in the history of this country in terms of the PIB. For the number of years it has stayed both with the executive and the National Assembly. Historically, you will have a very sharp division in the past between the Senate and the House and between the National Assembly and the executive. All the 20-odd years that this legislation has been around. But this time around, I saw a very seamless process, which was midwifed by the Honorable Minister of State for Petroleum Resources under the directive of our dear President to get this bill through as quickly as possible, which was a commitment, I guess, that the APC government also made to Nigerians. So I must commend them for this. And like Prof said, we do not expect to pass a perfect bill, as it were. I think it is a work in process. I also believe that the discussion that have come up through the process of the passing of the bill is also very interesting. And I sincerely believe that members of the National Assembly will align themselves, they will listen to Nigerians, and they will probably take decisions that might not be perfect, but will get us going. That's what I believe in through this, their harmonization process. It's also important to note that beyond the issue of frontier exploration and the host community, there are very interesting clauses and provisions within the bill, which of course we should not throw the baby away with the bathwater. For instance, the regulatory agencies that the bill seeks to create, the Commission and the authority, will bring transparency and clarity in terms of how we will manage the industry. In addition to making NNPC to be a lot more transparent beyond what they've been able to achieve today is also envisaged in the bill. So even when you look at the fiscal regime within the bill, I do not think the international.
All right, we seem to have lost signal. We're through to Simbi Babote. Of course, our engineers are on hand to take care of that. And when we get back, we will return to him for him to conclude his opening comment on the question put to him by my colleague, Kinsley. Now, let's return here to Abuja, where we have Sihaba Uke Epia. He was actually talking about some clauses and provisions of the bill that should not be really ignored. I didn't quite get him clearly, but what I want to ask you is this. You said a number of things regarding the provisions of this bill that are commendable with respect to host communities and what they get. But Professor Ubi was talking about not displacing what should be a state responsibility with whatever percentage of funding that will be given to host communities. If you understand that, let's clear that. And he also talked about the 30% profit as not just necessarily a profit from the NNPC, but from the exploration production. It's called it a sharing contract. What do you understand by that?
Well, he made the point about issues around the federation accounts, the definition, the constitutional provision around the federation structure that we have. And cast your mind back to the position taken by the Southern Governors Forum on this frontier fund, this 30% allocation. Their position is that that is monies that is meant for the federation and not for the federal government. And so such monies should normally go to the central pool before decisions like this may be taken. That position kind of explains what the professor is saying. Although I think that that position would have been enhanced if it was taken by the Nigerian Governors Forum. You know, because it's a noble point made, but you see what has happened to the entire, submission from that event. It's been, immersed in politicking. So I would expect, like many other Nigerians, that the Nigerian Governors Forum will speak up and make a point about this one, in fact, two key issues. The incorporation of NNPC Limited. The bill provides, as it is, that it will be incorporated by the Ministry of Finance and the Ministry of Petroleum Incorporated. NNPC, as currently is, belongs to the Federation and not to the federal government. It's owned, as it were, by the Federation. And that's why we talk about NNPC is not able to contribute, or is, I'm strong with respect to, remittances for sharing at FAC. So that ownership of NNPC Limited is a point that needs to be resolved between the federal and the state governments. Again, that is where the Nigeria Governors Forum, and not a provincial gathering or a regional gathering, should be making the point. The other being the issue of profits, 30% from the NNPC operations. Again, it's a funding that should go to the federation, and it should be decided not solely by an arm of government, the federal government. The Nigeria Governors Forum clearly has their work to do. I don't know if they have been sleeping on the PIB or this why that we have come to this point that we're almost close to, costing home, and then these issues are raised. Perhaps they didn't do much, Talking about the fine points, the other fine points around host communities that we should highlight, one of which is the fact that the bill, the initial proposal, only spoke about upstream, host communities in the upstream. Now, the report, as passed by both chambers, is that there will be a 2% allocation as well to midstream and downstream communities. In other words, it addressed to some extent the issue of impacted communities. If you recall, those were some of the questions that we had to deal with in our consultations. Is what about those who are not hosts, but they are also impacted heavily by the operations of the companies and the settlers, as it were. So that tends to provide an answer to it, even though it's like some experts would say, it's also fraught with its challenges, because how do you, what assets and facilities are you able to clearly define as midstream and downstream? So if I have a petrol station in the neighborhood of a host community, does that qualify me to pay 2%? The tank farms, or just probably, any other marginal asset. So there may need to be some resolution around that. It may have some challenges in implementation. But then it is commendable that the National Assembly and the government indeed listened to that agitation about impacted communities and made a point about it. Another very germane one is the fact that the issue of gas flare penalties, was also, the payments were made to benefit host communities that suffered this flare. The original proposal is that gas flare penalties should continue to be, paid to the federal government. But the bill, as it is now, has changed that. So if the communities that suffer the flares get the penalties, for projects in their area. And so that's a fine point to note. Of course, there are also areas that require further enhancements, like the issue of environmental remediation, for instance.
Yeah, okay. We're going to have to pause you because we'll come back to those other aspects. We understand that Engineer Simbi Wabota is back to us via Zoom. Engineer Wabota, we'll return to you. We know that you were making a panoramic comment, as it were, on the PIB before getting to the specific issues relating to local content. Just continue from where you left off.
All right, thanks a lot. I just hope the signal will just keep me on. So generally, I think the point I was making is that there are a lot of good things within the bill that will bring our oil industry to be a lot more transparent. On the issue of host community, I think the discussions are on between the both houses of the National Assembly. This is the first time it's been brought into the bill, as it were. So I am very confident that within the members of the Harmonization Committee, they will sort this out as quickly as possible for the benefit of Nigerians. But for the bill coming on board and looking at the host communities, clearly vindicates what NCDMB has been highlighting over the years, which of course led us to drafting of the community content policy. So I think this is very much in tandem with it. And when eventually it's harmonized, it will be better for us all as Nigerians. But coming specifically to the impact of the bill to local content development, I think we are very much excited. If you recall, a lot of projects were not sanctioned or either canceled by the various operators because of the uncertainty that did pervade the Nigerian oil and gas sector. And everybody has been yearning that we must pass a bill, no matter how imperfect it is. We must pass a bill that will create an element of certainty amongst investors. So for us, what we see, and when I went through the bill, both the physicals as well as the governance structure of it, I am very confident that if passed into law, investments will begin to come in, and that will help boost local content development. Don't forget, I've always made the point that there is no local content without projects, and this is the time for the projects to roll in. And I'm very much excited that as quickly as we can get this through, the better it is for us. And it is also important for us to know that with the energy transition, if we don't do something to be able to harness our God-given natural resources as quickly as possible, it will end up becoming like the coal mines you have in Enugu. We'll have so much gas, we'll have so much oil, and we have nothing to do with it, because the bullishness with which the Western world is pursuing the energy transition, or if you like, green energy, is very apparent to everybody. And in the next couple of years, we will see them ratcheting up that bullishness. So I think despite the imperfection in the bill, what we call for from the local content point of view is that we should make haste, while of course we still have the sun, rather than throw this into a long grass and eventually throw away the baby with the bathwater. We should be able to harmonize this as quickly as possible. It will not be perfect, but I think it will begin to open the vista of opportunities with regards to project development in the oil and gas sector. So let me stop for now and also listen to others. Thank you.
You are not stopping now, Simbi Wabute, because I want certain clarifications with respect to local content. Because not quite long ago, the president signed into law Order 5, which of course is keen into ensuring that Nigerians are participants in whatever production that takes place in the country, especially science and technology. And in the oil and gas sector, it's actually an area where we don't have much of Nigerian firms participating either in exploration or other stages of oil production. In that connection, what is in the bill, that will make it possible for Nigerian-owned firms to also be partakers in oil exploration, because we're hoping that we're going to have an influx of investors from outside the country?
Yes, I think the question is a bit distorted, but let me try to see if I understand your perspective. I guess oil exploration, it's not new to us, and a lot of Nigerians participate in the oil exploration. Oil exploration is practically the same drilling that we do, through seismic information and the rest of it all. So Nigerians are very active in terms of the exploration. And in terms of local content in science and technology and expanding it, if you recall, the president did sign some executive orders trying to extend local content beyond the oil and gas sector. This, of course, the National Assembly also took on based on the president's executive orders to see how they can bring about a legislation that will make it compulsory for other sectors of the economy to focus on local content. And most recently, we had to just step back a bit to watch the PIB. If not, the National Assembly has also gone through various public hearings and stakeholder engagement on how to fine-tune the Local Content Act and also how to expand it to these areas you have mentioned: science and technology, the construction industry, the manufacturing industry, and beyond the oil and gas. So that work is already in progress, but they had to step it back a bit in order to watch the progress of the PIB. As soon as the PIB is signed into law, I think that process will kickstart to extend local content to other sectors, particularly in the areas of science and technology, which will force, in a way, for Nigerians to invest a lot of money in research and development, because science and technology can only progress if there is research and development. Because like I said before, if we don't focus on research and development, very soon the Western world will refuse to give us all the necessary tools that we desire to continue to exploit and use our natural resources. So it behoves of us to focus greatly on science and technology in order to improve local content development. But I've said it several times, nobody is going to transfer technology to you in the way we have always discussed technology transfer. You have to be able to develop deliberate actions in order to enhance your technological advancement. And that can only come if we encourage science and technology and we invest in research and development. I hope I've been able to address your questions. I didn't get it properly, but I tried to piece it together.
Well, Engineer Wabote, you got the question right, and your response is also on point. Unless my colleague Kirian,
no, he has addressed it to some extent. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So let's return to Professor Wumi Iledare. Professor Wumi Iledare, well, again, as we know that the PIB, as it were, is one elephant, a fully grown elephant, so there are different parts to it. We can touch on many others. But one apparently interesting feature of the PIB has passed, but which has also created some controversy, relates to a contentious point in the downstream sector. The PIB now prescribes, as passed by the Senate, for the scrapping of the PPPRA, as well as the PEF, that's the Petroleum Equalization Fund. The PPPRA, of course, relates to Petroleum Pricing Regulatory Authority. By implication, there might be no, therefore, price fixing anymore. That was a power that was donated to the authority. What, in your opinion, does this mean? Bearing in mind, though, that in the version passed by the House of Reps, the House of Reps says, yes, fine, you can scrap PPPRA, but with regard to the Petroleum Equalization Fund, there should be a transition phase.
Well, again, thank you for your question. I'm going to speak generally on the institution, and that is, I will answer your question and then make comments on the institutional governance framework. Well, with respect to PEF existence, I think if we are going to go in the deregulation of the downstream sector, there can be no equalization. And so the existence of the Petroleum Equalization Fund is questionable. And so I think in the harmonization phase, yes, you may need to do what I call a partial deregulation before full deregulation. The only problem with that in Nigeria is that you may never get to do full deregulation because it becomes a power play. So I think I will support the Senate version whereby Petroleum Equalization Fund ceases to exist right away when the implementation of this bill begins. Second, the PPPRA is going to more or less diffuse into the authority, and the name will be changed because the objective and functions are well defined. Personally, I don't think we need two regulatory institutions, but if the Senate and the House feel that two regulatory institutions are necessary, so be it. However, we must create a section in the bill that allows the two institutions to have regular communication between them so that there will be proper coordination and there will be less amorphous approach to governing the industry. Now, I don't think we need to be afraid that if we don't control the price of downstream, our economy will collapse. I think that's a wrong misconception. And then we have history to support this. I mean, the price control was in place in the United States for many years, both for the gas and for the petroleum product. But when they removed it, the economy booms. So I just think it's because of the inability to be able to understand that the market works, and distorting the market can lead to maximization of social welfare losses. And we've seen it with our education, with our infrastructure, with energy, everything. Don't stop.
All right. Again, we are having issues with the line. Okay, well, we learned he's back. Prof, you may continue.
Quickly talk about the office of the minister, because you cannot implement this PIB from the policy aspect of the PIB if you do not have a strong office of the minister. And there's no way in which the Minister of Petroleum can support the responsibility of the office of the minister as it is. And I don't see anything in this PIB with respect to a functioning, fully informed Ministry of Petroleum. And if you don't do that, then the amorphous governance of the industry will continue. The minister will continue to depend on the regulator and the commercial section. So I would like to see a line for restructuring, rebranding, and what I'll call redefining the role of the office of the minister so that it can have a technical capability. And that's what the ES said that is important. You can't do all of this without proper educational structure to support PIB. I don't even see the need to train in this PIB. And that is very important. I know your time is important. There are so many other things we can talk about.
In fact, you have raised very pertinent points with respect to that very question. But I'd like to bring in, here again, to key into that, and of course, give us your own take on the issue of the downstream sector we was talking about, and of course, the issue of price control of fuel when PIB is finally passed into law as an act.
Well, first of all, it talks about the issue of dual regulation, dual regulatory agencies. The Commission, Nigeria Petroleum Upstream Regulatory Commission, and then the Authority for Midstream and Downstream. I recall in the work that we did in, assessing some of the submissions made to the National Assembly, that some players in the industry did canvass for a single regulator. I recall, for instance, that, let me not mention. So I think there's still some conversation going. The point about are we not likely to have some conflicts, indeed some an amorphous regulation, especially where the minister it does not seem to have a lot of technical capacity or capabilities, donated to it. But then I think that the minister provides general policy direction for the industry, which is what the bill stipulates. For me, I think that's fine. I'm fine with that. Whether we should have a single regulator, a dual regulator as it is, I think we should test this out and see how it plays. The industry is huge, it's large. Let's have that, delineation of roles and, responsibilities. But I agree totally with him that we should have that interface, regular interface between both regulators, so that there is no, it can rein in the possibility of that conflict, and lack of, uniformity, as it were, with respect to regulation. The downstream issue is touchy, and the bill, from my understanding, does not appear to be very clear whether we want to completely deregulate. It talks about, tariff mechanisms. It doesn't talk about price fixing as we currently have, but I think we need to see more clarity. Maybe by the time the bill is being operated, of course, that there will be subsidiary regulations, there will be subsidiary legislations, rather. There will be regulations by the authority, by the commission. So perhaps we'll wait and see how they want to implement these old tariff structures around the downstream. Of course, bear in mind that this is a strictly political issue. And that is where the minister, of course, has a lot of roles to play.
And the downstream issue affects the populace of this country. That is
precisely the point. So it's an issue that has that capacity to create either social cohesion or social distortion. So it's something that I tend to understand why there is not that definite, position in respect to the downstream tariff and all of that.
The fear is that many Nigerians are thinking that the implementation of this PIB bill might also bring in more problems in the industry with respect to implementation. Because from what our guests have been explaining, there appear to be some complexities in terms of interpretation, in terms of understanding the clauses, in the bill.
Well, that fear has been expressed. But also, there was a yearning for this PIB to say, look, let it come, because it will spark change. It will spark a new direction, a new way of doing things, so that the players in the industry will say, all right, we now have a clear direction as to what to go, where to go, how to go about it, because there is a framework governing the industry. The issue of implementation, Kirian, I believe, will be work in progress. So as you go along, you will see certain things. The fact that the PIB has been passed doesn't mean that it is cast in stone. At some point, you might require interpretation of the provisions. So those interpretations, of course, that's the power of the judiciary as enshrined in Section 6 of the Constitution. All right, so you're still watching Good Morning Nigeria live on NTA's network service. We're going to have to keep our three guests while we go on this short break. When we return, of course, we'll have more questions for them. All right, you're welcome back, and it's still Good Morning Nigeria on NTA's network service. Let's return to Engineer Simbi Wabota, who's still with us via Zoom. Engineer Simbi, from the 319 or so clauses in the PIB, is there a new deal, as it were, for indigenous producers in the oil and gas industry? And if so, how can we immediately or in the long term maximize the new opportunities?
All right. Thanks once again for that question. I think, yes, indeed, straight answer to your question, that yes, indeed, there is a new deal for indigenous producers in the current bill. That was why I said, rather than the whole country or stakeholders focus on this frontier exploration and the community, if you like, fund, we should also look at some of the good things within the bill to support local producers of oil and gas in Nigeria. I think to a large extent, the physicals within the bill itself tend to give that opportunity for marginal operators as well as indigenous oil and gas operators. And I think you will see, once this bill is signed into law, you will that will peak within the local operators and indigenous operators. Because currently, as it were, they struggle in terms of funding, in terms of how they access funds to develop the fields. But I think if the bill is signed into law and clear a lot of the uncertainties, then you're going to see investors, be it hedge funders, be it banks, wanting to support the indigenous producers to be able to bring out the hydrocarbon from the ground. But most importantly, when you look at the transition phase that Nigeria wants to take, it is focused on gas. And as been said in several fora, Nigeria is rich in gas. Today you have proven reserve of almost 206 TCF. This is a trillion cubic feet of gas. And then the unproven reserve, if you like, stands at about 600 trillion cubic feet of gas in addition, in total. So the potential is there. And you're going to see a lot of local investment in the gas sector in order for us to use gas to power, gas to manufacturing, gas to fertilizer, gas to gas liquids, GTL, and the rest of it. So you're going to see a lot of investments coming through that, because most of the gas fields that we are discovered by the industry were all capped in the past. But today, all that will be opened up, because in gas investment, you need a lot of certainty to be able to put your money in such investment. And I see opportunity for local producers if this bill is eventually signed into law by Mr. President.
I was just curious. I just like Engineer Waboto to also speak to this point, because it was raised by OKPR, and that has to do with what OK described as the heartwarming provisions now in the PIB relating to penalties for gas flaring. The penalties are now to be paid to the host communities rather than just say, look, pay the penalty to the federal government. And I imagine, of course, there's also an escalation rather than the paltry sums that we previously had. But from your industry experience, I mean, you're also a former share staff, well, is there going to be quite some challenge in making the computations so that communal clashes then do not result from saying, no, this gas, the flaring impacted us more than your other community? Would there be issues again relating to implementation of this otherwise clear provision of the PIB for gas flaring?
Thanks for that question. I don't think there will be. Luckily for us, the DPRO as is set up currently has done a lot of work with regards to trying to get the quantity of gas we flare today in Nigeria, and from which nodes and which fields this gas are being flared. So I don't think there will be any serious challenge in getting the quantity that is being flared. And I think it's, Professor Rolf will bail me out. The computation for how much you pay for it, so long as you know the quantity, it's not rocket science. It can be done. And I think one is excited that the host community, for once, will also begin to benefit from the, if you like, inability of the producers to reduce their flares down. It will go directly to them, and this payment, there won't be any issue with regards to its computation and how it's done, because a lot of work has been done in the back end. And I think this is the beauty of the constant discussion we have always had with regards to the oil and gas industry, the flare down program of the present administration. We then have a straight line to the quantity of gas that will be flared and how this will be charged. So to answer your question, I don't think there will be any serious challenge in computing that. But I think we need to, again, be sure that we set up a proper process on how the fund itself will be utilized and how it will come back to the communities. I think that's where we need to work on.
Yes, I quite agree with you, and of course many Nigerians would as well when it comes to the issue of how to utilize the gas instead of flaring it. Now the PIB is making provision for penalties for gas flaring. But some other persons are also talking about the issue of ensuring that we don't flee this gas anymore. And I want to ask Professor Wumi Iladere what he thinks of the provision made by PIB with respect to gas. Because now Nigeria is even said to be more of a gas nation than an oil nation. How can we, what is the provision made by the PIB to ensure that we utilize gas to the optimum level to a point where, of course, we will also be known as a full gas nation that does not flare gas?
Again, thank you. I think that, let me re-emphasize that the PIB has so many good things in it, and it must be emphasized so that we don't just throw it away because of two issues that are very thorny. And with respect to gas, I think for the first time also, you have fiscal framework for gas development. And there's even an incentive to produce gas for domestic use, which I think will actually accelerate economic development. I think the emphasis with the gas development in the PIB is more focused, not for harming foreign exchange, but more or less how can we use gas to power the economy. And there's also provisions, even in the PIB, with respect to how you sell oil to refiners in Nigeria. I mean, there are so many good things there. And I think if I can make a comment with respect to the flexibility and the what I call the efficiency and effectiveness of the fiscal regime, to a large extent, it follows what we call the fiscal rule of general application. Actually, it is actually a very generous bill focusing on investment. You see, royalty has been reduced, taxes have been reduced, even though I have my grasp with it. And that's why we encourage. There's not much we can do now with respect to the design of the bill, but at least there are certain lines we can put in that provision that will make this thing not perpetual. The current fiscal regime in Nigeria is highly generous to investors. It is progressive, it is attractive, and it's competitive. I don't particularly like it because the government has given so much so that investment can flow in Nigeria. I just hope that we're going to get a positive response to that. The royalty has been reduced from 18% to 15%, which I support. It has been reduced for shallow water from 16% to 12.5%, which is actually progressive. The tax, Nigerian hydrocarbon tax, has been reduced from 42.5% to 37.5%, which is quite generous. And I think there are so many things the government gave us to pacify the investors. And I just hope that the investors will respond in kind. Now, the only caveat in the gas development is fixing a price in the bill. I don't know whether there's anything we can do about that. I don't think that is pragmatic because the gas prices are so unpredictable with respect to economic output. And if you are going to want gas to be used domestically, you cannot price it and fix it in the bill. I think they need to look at that. I also think that some of the calculations on how to do tariffs should be left for the regulators. But all of these things are just cosmetic. And I think the National Assembly did their best. I think they were handicapped, if I can use the word, because they should not have let go of their technical advisory team when they did. And at the end, they were depending on the executive to advise them instead of having their own separate advisor, in my opinion. I just think that we need to look at this bill from the domestic expansion of our economy rather than for the purpose of generating money for sharing. And I will continue to emphasize that. Transfer payment should not be the focus of this PIB if we can do that.
Professor Iledare, thank you. All right, Professor Iledare, thank you very much. I'm sure your point has been picked up by our viewers with regard to what still needs to be done or touched up while the National Assembly is harmonizing the two versions passed by their two chambers. Back in the studio here, okay, Pierre, you know, the aspects relating to the definitions, let's just say the definition section, host communities as defined in the PIB, is this a term that is likely to create problems in the future? While you were speaking earlier, you were talking about the downstream sector, you were talking about the midstream. Where are we going to terminate host communities? We know that pipelines cause a lot of havoc with farmlands and residential areas and other venerated sites are often impacted by pipelines that crisscross different parts in, say, in the Niger Delta. So what is the outlook of the PIB on the definition of host communities? And take that along also with the issue of environmental remediation that is often allied to the fate of the host communities. Is the PIB salutary with regard to these points?
Thank you. Let me pick it up from the point made by Professor Iledare when he said that the National Assembly should have benefited more from independent consultations than they did. So what you see has happened is that there's a whole lot of heavy, uploading from the executive side in the bill. I mean, as at the day of passage, they received briefing from the executive, the GMD of the NNPC, and I think the minister had a briefing with them on the day they passed the bill. I mean, that's just the point to make that, to emphasize that there should have been a lot more independent, consultations. But we're already here, so that's fine. The points you have raised are very germane, and I refer to the National Assembly again because currently I have observed the work of a committee in the House of Representatives, the Committee on Host Communities, that has related on issues around the host communities, from their welfare to petitions, even to this funding proposed in the bill. And one of the clear things that have come out is that you see communities have certain levels of infighting amongst themselves because of this issue of definition. So currently, the PIB says, for instance, with respect to littoral and deep offshore, that the settler, the community, that's the company, has the responsibility to determine its host communities. I find that pretty much, curious. So that's to say to you again that we have missed an opportunity, perhaps, to address a definition, a cogent, acceptable definition of what's a host community. And if we miss this point, it will come back to haunt us pretty much soon. Because you also raised the point about the issue of gas flare and how communities could come up to say, look, we feel the impact more than you do, even though you are closer to the asset or to the operation. These things will happen. But because we have not had that definition, we have missed the moment to define this, we are going to be faced with this issue again. And so we must come to that point where the issue of downstream and midstream, the 2%, like I said earlier, we will have to find a way to resolve them. You raised the issue about environmental remediation. Again, that is one point that we have also missed in the PIB. The PIB stipulates an environmental remediation fund to be set up by the company. But again, it left some vagueness. It said as prescribed by regulation, the funding. Whilst it was definite about the frontier funding, whilst it was definite about the host community funding, why the vagueness with respect to that environmental remediation fund? And that the companies are at liberty to make an annual review and increase that funding at their own liberty. So again, that's one area the host communities will find pretty much objectionable. If there is a window to correct this, I am sure it will make them happier. If there's a window to also address the issue of discretionary flare of gas, which the bill currently provides for, it gives certain conditions where companies can continue to flare gas. For instance, like testing, emergency situation. These are things that may be determined solely by the companies and by the regulators at the detriment of communities. Of course, it talks about a plan to end flaring and all of that. But again, it continues to persist and it will remain of concern to the host communities. Why the fund for flare penalties would come to them, but there is no assurance that there are no windows whereby companies would or could continue to flare gas. That's of concern to host communities. We would have to find a way to address that sooner than later.
Yeah, that's a very germane aspect of this conversation, that issue of a definition of the host community, because in the long run, during the implementation, I know, as I mentioned earlier, I can see that there could be some, hindrances in terms of implementation when some of these critical issues of a definition and others, come to play. But let's get to Engineer Simbi Wabote once more. Of course, you have enumerated a number of areas, where Nigerians are going to benefit in terms of local content. Could you be more explicit on that? Let's understand more of the areas at the different stages of oil production where local content initiative will be of immense benefit to Nigerians.
All right, thanks for that question. Before I get to that, let me just give some bit of perspective with regards to gas flaring. If you look at the progress the industry has made over the years with regards to gas flaring, it's been tremendous. Most of the IOCs have stopped flaring. Some are still flaring because they needed to develop what we call AG solutions, which is associated gas solutions, in order to stop flaring. So gas flaring has been reduced to probably what you have today is just about maybe 20%, if I get the data right, that is being flared. All is being contained. And one of the major projects that have helped in mopping up all the flared gas today in the country is the NLNG, which of course, captures all the gas, liquefy it, and also export, as well as look at domestic consumption of the gas. So today, to come specific to your question, how Nigerians will benefit. An example is the Train 7 contract, which the Mr. President performed the groundbreaking ceremony. That is a $5 billion contract with potential to attract almost 10 to 12 billion foreign direct investment into the country, with a lot of the upstream activities that will happen. One benefit is that you are having FDIs coming to the country. Secondly, as a result of the Train 7, a lot of Nigerians that have developed capacity in fabrication will be engaged. During the Egina project, Nigeria was able to increase its fabrication capacity from 60,000 metric tons in a year to 250,000 metric tons, with a lot of fabrication yards opening up. With the Train 7, all these yards will be engaged, and that means a lot of employment for Nigerians. The Bonga Southwest project, which is being executed by SNEPCO, which is the deep offshore arm of Shell, is being on the drawing board for almost 15 years. The reason for that is because of the uncertainty associated with Petroleum Industry Bill, as well as the fiscal regime. Imagine Bonga Southwest with this bill coming on stream. It is projected to be about $8 to $10 billion investment into the country. If that amount of investment will come into the country, you imagine the number of jobs that we will create, the number of fabrication yards that will be engaged, and the number of direct, indirect, and induced activities that will benefit from that project on its own. The other one is the Shell HI and HA projects, which has also tied to some of the fiscal regimes that we see today in the existing law. But with the PIB, it has the potential to open up all those projects. These are just few projects, not to talk of the Shell Bonga North project, which is expected to fill in the existing Bonga FPSO. This will bring in investment of about $3 billion. So if I give you the numbers, it is expected that once, like Professor Eradere said, we have given a lot of concession to the investors. And if we sign this bill into law, you're expecting nothing less than $30 billion of direct investment coming into the country. And you can translate that into number of jobs, number of Nigerians that will be engaged, number of fabrication yards that will get busy. Today, on the LNG Train 7, 50% of the entire project will be executed in country, while the other 50% due to technology and patent rights will be out of the country. But imagine 50% of that work being done in Nigeria. It is expected to create about 40,000 jobs by the time that project starts in its entirety. So the benefits are just numerous. The potential for local content development is unparalleled. And I am so excited that if we can get rid of these knotty issues and are able to sign this bill into law, it will transform this nation and let us exploit our hydrocarbon resources as quickly as we can before the so-called energy transition will catch us napping.
All right, Engineer Wabote, thank you very much there for your views. Virtually now, we're winding down on to this conversation. So let me return to Professor Wumi Ledare. Professor Wumi Ledare, as much as you can compress your response, please take this question. The point has been made that, well, in some respects, the PIB appears to take a here and now view rather than a futuristic view of the energy sector. I mean, we see the pressures coming from renewables and what needs to be done. We know that, of course, there are other government investments, but they are all linked into the energy mix. What would you have liked to see in terms of a future view perspective in the PIB, which appears to be missing in the opinion of some analysts?
Well, again, thank you for the question. I'm going to build it on what I call the generosity of the fiscal regime for now. I would have expected some Nigerian hydrocarbon tax on deep water, even if it is going to be suspended for a while. I would have expected some royalty on gas, even if it's going to be suspended. If you look at the Petroleum Industry and the Petroleum Act of 1969, I think, that's what we're still using today. When do you think we are going to be able to come back to renew this bill? And that's what I mean by writing a bill that put the future into consideration. And also another thing I would have loved to see is NNPC. We have not talked about that. I still think the bill is still giving too much agency role on NNPC. And that has been what has encumbered NNPC for years. I would have expected the bill to take NNPC completely away and make it apolitical. You know, you just have too much dependence on NNPC for policy, for regulation, for everything. And that has not made NNPC to be at the same status level with their counterparts. And it's not because there are no competencies in NNPC. It's just that they are too encumbered with agency role. And that's what I mean by the future. And under the energy transition dynamics, surrendering 30% of profit oil to chase the wind, because the geological data has been there since the 50s.
Well, thank you, Professor Wumi Eladere. I think he made a valid point here, Kinsley, with respect to the issue of NNPC, because, of course, the Senate approved in Clause 53 of the bill, which empowers the NNPC to now transform into a limited liability company 6 months after the act. So perhaps that's still empowering NNPC instead of, against the Professor Wumi Eladere's own consideration.
Well, yeah, there are aspects of that. You know, in part one yesterday, Kieran, we touched on this briefly. I believe that there will be an opportunity to return in greater detail to discuss the corporate governance issues around the new NNPC that the PIB envisages.
All right. here we go. For today's edition of the program, we thank you immensely for being part of it. I would like to appreciate Oke Epia, Executive Director, Order Paper Nigeria, Engineer Simbiwa Bote, Executive Secretary, Nigerian Content Development and Monitoring Board. We thank you. Professor Wumi Ladere, Professor of Petroleum Economics, and of course, a key staff of the Oil and Gas Institute, Ghana. We appreciate all of you for your contributions this morning on Good Morning Nigeria.
All right, so see you on Monday, same time, 7 o'clock in the morning. Until then, do enjoy yourself. Take care of yourself also over the weekend. I'm Kingsley Osadolo.
Have a great weekend.